All right, everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to tackle an interesting company and industry. It's Affle India Limited, and they're right in the thick of the mobile advertising market.
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating space to look at just because of how much it's evolved, even in the past few years. And to really break this down and to see what Affle is doing, I think it's helpful to use a framework. And the framework we're going to be using today is Porter's 5 Forces.
Yeah, Porter's 5 Forces is one of my favorite frameworks. I mean, it's a classic for a reason, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So just for our listeners who maybe haven't encountered this before, can you just give like a quick explainer of Porter's 5 Forces?
Absolutely. So Porter's 5 Forces, essentially, it analyzes the competitive forces within any industry. So it tries to assess, how profitable and how sustainable an industry is, and it also helps figure out, the position of any individual company within that industry. So the 5 forces are the threat of new entrants, bargaining power of buyers. We also have the bargaining power of suppliers and threat of substitute products or services. And last but not least, the rivalry among existing competitors.
Okay, so we've got our compass, our Porter's 5 Forces. So let's apply this to Affle India Limited. Now, they are all about mobile advertising. So they help businesses connect with potential customers through ads that we see on our phones, on our tablets, etc. So maybe we can start with that rivalry among existing competitors. I mean, this feels like a really crowded space, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly fragmented. I mean, you have so many players in the market, large and small. So, some of the ones that come to mind are companies like UAppy or InMobi. There's also companies like RevX. And these are just, a small handful. So Affle really has to, differentiate itself. And I think one of the ways they do this is through their consumer intelligence platform.
Okay, now this sounds interesting. Tell me more about their consumer intelligence platform. What makes this special?
So their platform is really based on data. They acquire and analyze just massive amounts of data on consumer behavior. And it goes way beyond demographics. They really try to understand user preferences and habits. So what are you interested in? What kind of apps do you use? Where do you go online? What do you do offline? And with this information, they can predict future actions and they can target ads. The right ad to the right consumer at the right time. And I think that's really key in such a crowded market, making sure that every impression counts.
It's that whole idea that they're not just serving random ads, right? They're trying to really hone in on what a particular consumer wants. So they have this really interesting cost per converted user model. It's like CPCU.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about this? Because it seems kind of different from just your standard way of paying for ads.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a performance-based model, right? So essentially, Affle only gets paid when a user takes a specific action. So this could be making a purchase, installing an app, completing some desired action for the advertiser. And I think this is really appealing to advertisers because, it minimizes their risk. They're not just paying for impressions that may or may not convert. They're paying for actual results.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now, they also seem to be very strategic about the sectors that they target, right? They're really focused on kind of high growth areas like e-commerce and fintech.
It's almost as if they're choosing their battles very carefully. Oh, absolutely. And I think that's really smart, right? Because these are booming sectors. They have huge advertising budgets. I mean, just think about, how much advertising you see from e-commerce companies alone. And, they're not afraid to be aggressive. I mean, they've been on an acquisition spree lately. They've bought companies like Jamp, MediaSmart. And I think what they're trying to do is really solidify their position in these key sectors.
So they're not just playing defense, they're also going on offense. All right, so we talked about the competition that's already there, but what about the threat of new entrants? Like, is it easy for some upstart company to just sort of come onto the scene and start competing with someone like Affle?
Well, not so easy, actually. I mean, building the infrastructure and the technology for mobile advertising is incredibly complex. And it's expensive. You need a lot of expertise. And, Affle already has a massive head start.
Right.
They have established relationships with publishers, advertisers. And, let's not forget their consumer intelligence platform. That's a huge asset. So it's a significant barrier to entry for any new company trying to break into this space.
So they've really built a fortress, but I feel like with technology, things are constantly changing. So is there that risk that maybe a disruptive technology or some new startup with a totally new approach could come along and shake things up?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a possibility, right? You can never predict the future. And I think that's something that Affle needs to keep in mind. And no matter how strong their position may seem today, complacency is dangerous, right? So they need to constantly innovate. They need to be on the lookout for new technologies and new trends and, be prepared to adapt. Because if they don't, then someone else will come in and disrupt them.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the bargaining power of buyers. Now, the buyers in this case are the advertisers. So, the folks who are actually paying for these ads to be shown to people. I mean, it seems like they have a lot of choices, right? There are tons of platforms. It's almost like going into a bakery with like 100 different types of bread. You've got all the power.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I mean, there are so many options, and advertisers are definitely aware of this, right? They shop around, they compare prices, they negotiate deals. So yeah, they definitely have bargaining power. But Affle has a few ways to kind of mitigate this. First of all, they really emphasize the return on investment, or ROI, right? They show their clients, look, your money is not just disappearing into a black hole. We can demonstrate that our ads are generating actual results.
Yeah, prove it to me, right?
Yeah.
Show me the money.
Exactly, and the CPCU model actually helps with that a lot because, again, it's tied to measurable results. So you can actually see what you're getting for your money. And another thing that comes into play here is, these third-party rankings and reviews. Because there are so many mobile advertising platforms, advertisers rely on these rankings and reviews to help them navigate the market.
Oh yeah, those like best of lists that we see popping up everywhere.
Exactly. And if Affle gets a positive review from a reputable source, that's a huge endorsement. And it can attract new advertisers. But on the flip side, if they get a negative review, that can be really damaging. So it's really important for them to manage their reputation to ensure that, they're seen as a reliable and trustworthy partner for advertisers.
Reputation's everything. All right, let's talk about the other side. So the bargaining power of suppliers. Now, when we talk about suppliers in this context, we're not talking about like the factories making smartphones, right? We're talking about the companies that essentially provide the space for these ads to be shown. So who are these suppliers?
Exactly. So the suppliers in this case are the publishers, right? And this can include device manufacturers. So those are the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers. It can also include mobile operators, app developers. So anyone who essentially has a platform where they can display ads. And Affle has done a good job of diversifying its partnerships. So they work with a wide range of publishers across different sectors. And this is smart because it means they're not overly reliant on any one particular supplier.
Spreading the risk, yeah.
Exactly. But there is one kind of looming threat on the horizon, and that is the rise of what I call these walled gardens.
Ooh, walled gardens. Tell me more.
So these are, large platforms that essentially control access to their own users and their own data. Think about the app stores or social media giants, right? They have their own advertising platforms and they have a massive reach, right? And so they're becoming increasingly powerful. And this creates a bit of a dilemma for a company like Affle, because on the one hand, these walled gardens can be valuable partners, right? They provide access to a huge audience, but on the other hand, they can also be potential rivals.
Right.
Because they're essentially competing for the same advertising dollars. So it's this, it's a delicate dance, right? Affle needs to figure out how to navigate these relationships carefully.
Yeah, like frenemies almost. So last piece of the puzzle. Threat of substitute products or services. So we've been talking about mobile advertising, but are there other ways that companies could be reaching consumers? I mean, is it possible that, good old-fashioned TV or print ads could make a comeback?
Yeah.
Or are there completely new technologies that could come along and disrupt mobile advertising altogether?
Well, I think there will always be alternative ways to reach consumers. I mean, TV ads, they're not going away anytime soon. But the world is becoming increasingly mobile first, right? I mean, just look around. Everyone's glued to their smartphones. And the beauty of mobile advertising is that you can target specific user groups, based on their behavior, their interests, their demographics. It's incredibly powerful. So while I don't think mobile advertising is going to disappear overnight, it's definitely a space that's constantly evolving.
Right, so it sounds like Affle India Limited, they're playing a really smart game here. I mean, they're leveraging data, technology, strategic partnerships to really stay ahead of the curve. So, I mean, for anyone who's interested in this space, it sounds like this is a company to keep your eye on.
Oh, absolutely. They're doing some really innovative things, and it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to evolve in the coming years.
Yeah, and as these walled gardens get more and more powerful, how will a company like Affle adapt? I mean, what kind of new strategies will they need to develop to sort of stay ahead of the game? That's something to think about, for sure. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. And we will catch you next time on The Deep Dive.